start meeting,
I don't think so. You should be good.
but it's still blue up in the top corner saying start.
I think it's kicking off. It might be counting down. Okay, I think we're live.
It's going up. It's at 16, 17, 18.
Okay, yes, I think we are good. We are live and good to go. Okay, so let's kick this off. So for anyone who may be joining us here right now, thanks for your patience. This is only the second time we've done something like this where we've done a live stream using this particular software. So we're still getting the hang of it a little bit here. But as you come on, as you are joining, please let us know, leave a comment if you are watching this in, let's see, I'm checking that I think we are able to see LinkedIn. We're also over on YouTube right now and I believe Instagram. So please introduce yourself. Let us know that you are here. But today what we're going to do, so let me start with introductions. So we are CDK Enterprises. I'm Christy Schnurl. I head up business development here, and David Krawczyk is the president and founder of CDK. We are a consulting firm that helps commercial real estate developers to build more cost effectively and to help them reduce their construction costs. So some of the areas that we mostly focus on in the asset classes, we're very heavy in multifamily space as well as hospitality. We do mixed use, things like that. We've been around for over, was it over 20 years now?
25
years. Over the last decade or so, we've been focused primarily in the multifamily and hospitality space. Before that was residential. So we have participated now, I think, close to 60 multifamily and hospitality projects over the last decade and manage construction costs of about $1.5 billion now. So we have a unique perspective when it comes to construction because of the role that we play with working with developers, architects, engineers, general contractor subs, and the background that CDK has in supply and distribution. So Dave, do you want to do a quick intro on yourself, and then we'll kick off kind of the topic we wanted to talk about today?
Sure. Thank you, Christy. Yeah, I'll keep this really short at a high level. I've been involved in single family / multifamily the segments for better than 50 years. Started out on the supply side, which has allowed us to really leverage that knowledge that my first 25 years in my career were focused on the supply side, culminating with the president and CEO of a couple of different businesses. One, a $1.2 billion business, building material and component manufacturer in the Midwest. After leaving there, CDK started cutting its teeth working with the nation's largest single family builders nationally. And that included a lot of very recognizable names, Lennar, D.R. Horton, KB, et cetera. And then, as Christy indicated, about 10 years ago, we made the decision to adjust our strategy and provide pre-construction and procurement services for multifamily developers. And the basis behind that was pretty simple. Large, major single-family builders had all of those services in-house and were able to control their own path. They did their own design, architectural plans, all their own procurement. They were their own GC. And that integrated process, I think, is what has really allowed those builders to be extremely efficient. So the concept behind CDK moving into that space for multifamily was to provide that on behalf of multifamily developers who typically, very few, actually are vertically integrated in that sense. So we begin all projects typically working with the developer and coordinating directly with their architect of choice, the design of the project, move from that into budgeting based as the design starts taking shape, creating a construction budget, and then moving that right into a pre-bidding process that allows us to compile actual market data on the cost of a project. And we either do that in conjunction with the GC if one has been selected, or we do it prior to selecting the GC so that that information can be shared with the GC so they understand how the developer has established its construction budget. So with that, that's where we are today with CDK.
All right. So now that for anyone who's new to us, hopefully that gives you at least a 10,000 foot view to understand, who we are and why we're here today. But what we wanted to touch on was to have a conversation around was been an increasingly important topic over the last few years, in particular, as construction costs continue to rise. So we wanted to touch on what that looks like in the current market, where construction costs kind of are, the effect that we've seen so far this year with tariffs. And then really we wanted to share some case studies and specific strategies, tactics, the things that we're doing internally right now to help our developer clients to reduce their costs and to build effectively. In particular, we have 3 multifamily projects over the last 12 months that we've helped to deliver at just around $200 per square foot. And so we wanted to open up the discussion here and dive into a little bit about what that looks like, how we were achieving that, and share a little bit more information. If you are joining us live, we would love to open it up for any questions. So as we're going, if you have questions or there are particular things that you want us to kind of drill into more, then please just drop a comment and we'll address those as well as we go. But Dave, did you want to go ahead and share? Maybe we just start with the general market, the effect we've been seeing of 2025, what that's looked like in the construction industry, and the effect of tariffs and all of that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Christy. Yes, I'll start out by stating why we're focused or believe the benchmark of $200 a square foot is somewhat of interest to most people. And it comes based on over the past 24 months, we were getting consistent feedback from various clients and developers that either were clients or potentially were interested in becoming a client, indicating that there was a lot of pressure on increasing construction costs, and they were seeing them reach levels that were making deals very difficult to achieve. And to try to put that in perspective, they were looking at something between $240 to $260 a square foot. And those are certainly about at the highest level that I've seen since we've been involved in this segment in the past 10 years. And the challenge that developers are having with that is obviously funding that, creating, a pro forma and a return for their investors that made sense. We're forcing them to either evaluate, elevate, lease rates that aren't sustainable today. They're also probably the highest they've been, I will say, all time. And there's a lot of pressure in various markets to start reducing rates because of the affordability aspect. So I'll start out by saying the way we have been able to achieve $200 or less, and I'll kind of go through the 3 projects here briefly. But before I do, what I really want to emphasize, the most key element here, and this subject has got a lot of traction on LinkedIn, and many of you may have made comments or read some of the comments. And there are all kinds of skepticism, comments, questions about how that's achievable, et cetera. And the first thing I want to state, the only way this becomes achievable is if all of the stakeholders, and that means the developer, the architects, the engineers, the general contractors, and of course, CDK, all work in a collaborative effort. 5 heads in that case are far better than one. And the fact that sorry about that, I get distracted on that call. The fact that oh goodness, I apologize there. What I was trying to sit here and state is the fact behind that is that we all often get stuck in our own success. We've been successful for years, being able to, achieve the results that we have, and opening up your mind to newer ideas and different concepts sometimes is a struggle. When that's achieved, the 3 projects that I'm going to walk you through, I will tell you every one of them had budgets presented to them, to the developers, significantly higher than what we ultimately ended up achieving. And with that, I'll go ahead and start sharing a couple of the concepts that we go through. Number one, which we saw this surface a little bit in the comments, if you had the correct architectural design in the beginning, it might eliminate the need for value engineering off of the set of plans. We have worked with dozens of architects and engineers, most of whom have extensive multifamily experience. And what we often see, and this by no means is a question to the architect, they're all extremely talented. They design wonderful, aesthetically beautiful and pleasing projects. But what lacks at times and presents an opportunity is the understanding of the various costs associated with different code approved UL assemblies. And different assemblies have different costs. And those costs could be with material, or they could be with labor, or they could be a combination of both. And many times, an architect doesn't have that level of understanding, or believes they do because they had heard it or been told it during past projects. But things may have changed. Another example, which we encountered a lot in the past 2 years, the first 6 to 8 years we were involved in multifamily, floor systems were almost exclusively I-joist, engineered wood, because of cost. And it was a cost-effective option. The drop in the lumber market over the last 18 months, bringing pricing down lower than it's been in 5 years, has produced an opportunity in which floor trusses actually are more cost effective. And from a design perspective, most architects and engineers prefer them, and felt a lot of headaches went away with worrying about, how to run mechanicals through closed webbed I-joists systems. So those are just 2 examples. We have a litany of examples that we could go through relative to why a collaborative process throughout the design that kind of brings in labor, material, efficiencies have a direct impact on the design. Ideally, if we're involved in the beginning, we try to factor those in. Many times we're brought in after the fact because the bidding isn't matching the budgeting. So in any case, that hits us on architecture. On the bidding process, a couple of things that we do that's very, very unique and we advocate very strongly is that as we evaluate bid results in various markets, there is an opportunity if a market in particular is extremely active, meaning there's a lot of development, multiple projects going up, cost typically follow. It's a supply and demand formula. There's such an overwhelming demand in that market. Subcontractors are very busy. Pricing starts to escalate. So we're very conscious of what's going on in a market. And if that activity exists, what we coordinate with a general contractor and suggest be done in those circumstances is to introduce out-of-market subs, those that have been vetted, those that actually travel and specialize in multifamily. And they'll come into a market typically at rates below what you might be experiencing locally. We have achieved that in all three of the projects that I'll summarize here when I'm through with these examples, where out-of-state subs or out-of-market subs, depending on where that project's being built, produce some level of savings. And, we're talking a half a dozen scopes, not the entire project. And then the third element is really material pricing. What we have learned that there are categories that, for whatever reason, very consistently from market to market, it benefits the project greatly if that material can be purchased separately from labor. So the general contractor would actually issue the PO, control the flow of that material, and the subcontractor would install it. Yes, there are times the subcontractor pushes back on that. But the bottom line is there are subs that'll do it on a labor-only basis. Those categories, which I'll share a few with you right now, a couple of the big ones, lumber, trusses, and I can explain a little bit more why on that. And that is, purchasing lumber typically by most subs is done through local relationships that they have. And not that those relationships aren't valuable to them, but on a large scale project, a local lumberyard typically is not going to be competitive with a what I'll call an office wholesale lumber broker. And that doesn't mean all the material gets dropped on the site at one time and it's a nightmare to manage. Yes, I've heard those stories. Yes, that's how people have done it in the past. We believe that through scheduling and coordination, you can have lumber delivered very similar to what a local lumberyard can do. And then we always establish a relationship with a local lumberyard for fill-in or any emergency orders needed. So there are ways around all of it, okay? Another category would be siding, certainly millwork, doors, windows, etc. Those are all key categories that absolutely consistently and in all three projects that I'll summarize here shortly, the savings on those added up to well over $1 million just in purchasing the material separate from the labor, based on the fact that this material is coming in from manufacturers that specialize in multifamily projects. Christy, I saw you just post something up. Is there any questions at this point, or should I just keep moving along? I can't hear you.
All right. Sorry about that. My connection was unstable, so it had kicked me off and muted me. But I was just putting in there in case people at this point, if they have questions or anything, feel free to drop them in. For whatever reason, they're not showing up. I think most of the viewers right now are over on LinkedIn. So I do have that open on another screen. So I'm trying to keep up. So if you do have questions, this is a great time we can talk about your project specifically, your market, because I know some of the costs do vary by market and by project. And I think that's something too that might be worth diving into a little bit is, $200 a square foot is a valuable metric in the context of certain things, right? Like depending on the market, depending on what you're building, depending on what if that can, so many different factors, it's only one metric of many, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's like if you were building a tiny 500 square foot pool house, $200 a square foot is going to look different than if you're building like a large multifamily project, amenity rich or something. So can you give some more context around, I guess, the projects where we're seeing those kind of numbers, the markets, and what that might look like for people who aren't in those markets?
Sure, that's a great point. The last three projects, along with the next two that we're looking at currently, all happen to be in the Pacific Northwest. Okay, so the states of, Montana, Oregon, Utah, etc. The size of those projects varied. The smallest was only 72 units, and that 72 unit project came in at about $198 a square foot. And I emphasize that because one of the points Christy raised is it's an interesting metric, because at 72 units, you're spreading the entire civil cost, as an example, site work, across only 72 units. As you get to larger scale projects, the site work isn't always proportionate to the number of units, depending on the conditions of the site. But what we've usually seen, that smaller projects, it's much harder to get at the same level as larger projects. But that wasn't the case with this project. We were fortunate. Although we did have some site-related challenges, but it was a small site to begin with, which helped. The second project, which by the way, that project, we bid that out and it got finalized in July and August timeframe, 2024. That project is just now being completed. One of the two buildings has been turned over to the developer. The other one will be turned over the first week in December. That project right now, the 198 a square foot, is in fact where we will come in. The original budget was $13,950,000, and this project is going to come right in just under 14 million. So it had a contingency in there. The entire contingency wasn't utilized, and the contingency was in the original budget. So really strong result, one that the GC did a wonderful job in managing, and we had a good network of subs and suppliers that helped produce the result that we achieved. We, meaning the entire team. The second project, which we finalized just within the last 2 weeks, much smaller project, okay? This is a single building on a couple acre site, 40 units, 4 stories with an elevator, okay? That project right now is budgeted. When I say budgeted, it's been completely bid out, and contracts are being awarded, is at $201 a square foot. So I want to talk a little bit let me finish the summary and then I'll talk a little bit, because I want to qualify the square foot pricing. The third project, we completed that pricing, and the GC is currently ready to issue contracts. That got bid out and finalized early October. The financing is scheduled to close next Wednesday, and the GC will be issuing contracts to those subs. That project, a little bit larger in scale, it's 27, almost $28 million in total. It's 128 units, 1 3-story building, 2 4-story buildings, both elevated, the 4-story. And it's coming in at $194 a square foot. So to help put a little bit more perspective also on the types of projects and products being installed in these, although different developers, the products and finishes are very similar. These are really high quality kitchens with reasonable size islands or peninsulas, depending on the configuration of the unit. When I say reasonable, 8 feet or so. Plywood box cabinets. Typically shaker is what most apartment projects are doing right now. All solid surface countertops, either quartz or granite. All luxury vinyl flooring, SPC. Wear layers of either 20 or 22 mil. Um, so, these are when it's not being accomplished by cutting back on the quality of the project. Stainless steel appliances, washers and dryers in every unit in all of these cases. So the bottom line is the value is being achieved through, the tactics that I reviewed earlier. Keeping that open mindset, separating material from labor, bringing in some complementary out-of-market subs, evaluating the plans to see if there's an opportunity to maybe bring in some variations to wall floor assemblies, maybe change up the siding a little bit without changing the look of the project. So there are a number of items that are available, and all of those are done hand in hand and in tandem with the entire set of stakeholders.
Yeah, so we have, appreciate you diving into that a little bit more, because I think it gives everyone some context, since, that number by itself doesn't really mean anything. But Ethan is on here and he's asking about the California market. If you have any thoughts or considerations on that, in particular, San Francisco Bay Area counties, LA County. I mean, we haven't done projects in California. I happen to live in California, but I think we still can certainly speak to this point generally.
Yeah, well, the only way we can speak to it is we don't have a current multifamily client in California. My previous experience with single family, boatloads of single family construction was done. And most of that, obviously with very large home builders, right? Lennar, D.R. Horton, et cetera. And in all cases with single family, most of our focus really was on the structural shell. So it would have been, framing lumber, siding, things of that nature, roofing. But in every case, we were successful with that. Unfortunately, I can't really speak to the multifamily. We don't have a multifamily client there. I know the San Francisco area, they build very different project, mid to high rise project, which is gonna, square footage prices won't be comparable for that. LA varies. There's a lot of wood frame projects in Los Angeles. We just don't have a clientele base today that's based in Los Angeles or building in those markets. So I can't speak to them directly. Certainly would be interested, Ethan, if you have a project there and talking about that. I see really no difference between the two markets. I think the same strategies all apply, and would love an opportunity to do that in California.
Yeah, I think that the thing that's interesting, I don't see another one just yet, but if other people want, to hop on, or if in general you have questions, don't have to be about your market or asset class, but I think, when it comes to this, one of the things that I've learned over this last decade of working with CDK is that a lot of we implement so many strategies, and that's really kind of the key takeaway with this, because I think everyone thinks like, oh, there's a magic bullet to like lower your, reduce the construction cost or to get to a certain number, and it's like, oh, you have to do this, or if you just do this, or they see that one success or that win in that one area. But the reality is there are so many opportunities and so many different pieces along the way, right? Like if you're involved very early in design, you can value engineer as you go instead of having it be a Band-Aid or a fix at the end. If you are open to, and part of it's going to be the team too. So it's on you. If you're a developer, if you're an architect, if you're an engineer, if you're a GC, if you were a sub, it applies to everyone, all the entire team and the stakeholders. Like the more open-minded you are, and the more willing, it depends on how willing you are to explore other strategies and to not be so rigid in just how you've always done things and to stick with that. a lot of it, we have great relationships with suppliers that we have used over and over and over. And same thing with subcontractors. However, every project that we work on, we still go out and try to solicit new vendors, or we still bid to, a large pool. And the goal of that is that just because someone has delivered great on previous projects, their pricing made sense, all of these things, there might be another opportunity out there, someone else that could step in, then it makes sense to start diversifying, right? Or that is a great new find. There's also tons of product innovation that's always happening that affects supply. So just because you've been, using a certain exterior facade material doesn't mean that that's the one that's the best choice, because there are things, they continue to innovate where the challenge of labor that we're facing, even there are things that are easier to install and to put up. So there's a lot of different things along the way. Traveling subs, as Dave has already mentioned. So understanding the markets in the US in general to know, okay, who has higher labor rates in certain trades, where are they lower? It may not be effective for you if you're doing, a smaller project where it's just a single home or something. But when you're doing a larger development or you're doing multifamily, it does make sense to start pulling in traveling subs. But a lot of people get nervous when it comes to some of these other strategies, because if they haven't done them before, it can feel like it's throwing a wrench in if you don't know what you're doing. Or separating material and labor is so powerful and something CDK strongly believes in and does, instead of relying on all turnkey bids. But again, it does take that level of experience to understand and work with, the subs, the suppliers, and everyone to get everyone comfortable with it and okay with it, and to solve around the issues or the objections that they're having along the way. So that's really, something that we want to continue to emphasize. It looks like Aaron posted a question here. So let me pull that up. So Aaron is asking, when you state stakeholders, does that include trades that are slated to be contracted? Do you bring them on before design is started or completed? Reduces change orders if they have a seat at the table early. I have a commercial design build firm in Denver.
Okay, so let me touch on that one. That's an interesting question. Appreciate that, Aaron. Here's during the design process, basically when we get through or into the design development phase, so we're through schematic, more details are starting to get laid out on the project. We choose typically 5 to 6 key trades to go actually out, review the plans at that stage, provide pricing and budgeting pricing at that point. We're not going to hold them to that particular bid, along with a general set of assumptions that they may be that they may want to suggest or they used in putting together their preliminary budgets, if that makes sense. So we'll take that particular feedback and be able to then evaluate it against what we had benchmarked for those scopes, a cost, and then either continue the dialogue with the sub to incorporate their suggestions and recommendations to lower cost and or adjust design. So to answer your question, it's done, but it's not done across the board with every single scope. It is certainly done. Typically, we'll have a civil contractor take a look at it. Usually, all of the the MEPs, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, occasionally fire suppression, but our belief is that's fairly straightforward. But the other 3 for sure. So hopefully that answers your question. The one challenge we end up having a little bit with that, and I see that you have a design build firm, is if it is subs that you're using on a regular basis and you plan to contract with, you get a different answer and different level of feedback than subs that aren't assured they're going to get the project if they're brought into the process. So sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge with what we're doing. But we do agree there are stakeholders. And let me touch a little bit on what we do with subs that's very, very different than I think most general contractors do. I didn't mention this earlier when I talked about purchasing material and labor separately. And this kind of goes hand in hand with that. We produce material takeoffs and in some case even some labor data points as we establish our budgets. We share all that information with bidders. So whether you've been awarded the project or not, if we have 3 framers bidding the project, we'll provide that material list to those 3 framers, the backup that supports the material list. And what I mean by backup, depending on the software that's used, we'll give them layouts, things that substantiate the quantities and the quality of the takeoff. And that isn't just framing. If it's a flooring sub, he'll get all of the square footages, lineal footages, transition points, everything he needs to effectively bid that. We share that information directly with all subs so that hopefully it does 2 things. Number one, it helps validate, because I'm a big believer in at least a triangulation type process when it comes to material and bidding. You're working with 3 different perspectives, ours, the subs, and the GCs, for determining what's needed to bid this project accurately. And by bringing those 3 thoughts together, you're going to get better information. Okay. I'm not suggesting one is smarter than the other or one is more accurate than the other. Typically what happens is all of them have some valuable input that needs to be factored into the final decision. So I think that's a key point. The second thing that Christy raised, and I want to emphasize, I'm not sure it ties in directly to your question, Aaron, but it's a legitimate one, because what I often hear is really what CDK does is what we do, and we've been doing it for 25 years, okay? And one of the key points I try to make, being respectful, and I mean this, is we understand everybody goes out, solicits bids, analyzes those bids, vets them, and puts together a budget. But that's all we do. Our focus isn't on building the project, on other aspects of what needs to be done by the general contractor. So we wake up every day, if we're not bidding a project, researching products, researching new subs, doing reviews post-mortem to projects that we've done, if there were categories that came in over budget. You mentioned change orders, I think, in that last comment. I can tell you right now, which was the project that we just recently will finish. It'll be done in 10 days. The owner will take already occupied one building. The next building will be fully occupied in 10 days. There were some change orders, but the change orders were less than the contingency that was budgeted for the project. And I will also emphasize, although I don't have an exact number on it, the contingency on that project was 3%. Okay, so I shared with you the budget was $14 million. So 3% is about $500,000. We're going to come in under budget by 50 to 100 grand, somewhere in that area. So very little of the contingency was used. And my intuition tells me, based on being involved in the project throughout construction, about 50% of those change orders were owner directives. Changes the owner wanted to make for whatever reason. We were coming in, we weren't using the contingency. They said, hey, we weren't going to do this. Let's go ahead and do that. This looks cleaner. One of them, I'll give you an example, and it added $100,000. They said, let's add carports. We didn't, I'd like to get, 30 carports in there so that they can rent those and add that into their operational cash flow and profit. So the bottom line is share as much as you can. Yes, we believe subs are a major part of the stakeholders. Our goal, and it's interesting because I think I read in one of the comments when we put this up that just squeezing subs for every dime to hit a budget isn't a realistic strategy. I can tell you emphatically, we don't do that at all. Our perspective, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Our perspective is the sub has to be profitable. He has to be able to earn the level of profit that he believes he's entitled to do the project. I have on occasion, and when I say occasion, it doesn't happen with every bid. It happens, usually in the course of one or two, maybe subs on a given project at any given time, when we're really trying to question pricing, because it just seems too high. And, you're getting pushback from the sub. I'll ask when I'm dealing with the owner, what's your target profit? What, tell me, share with me. I'm not going to be offended. We know you need to make money. And if they're willing to share that information, and I turn around and say, now, what if we can come up with some alternatives that lower your cost, but allow you to achieve your targeted profit? Are you okay with that? The answer I've always gotten, with very few exceptions, is absolutely. And then all of a sudden the dialogue changes. Now maybe they're okay with separating some of the material, maybe all of the material. And the reason I'm saying that, because they push back on separating material because they have a margin in the material and they're going to lose that margin. Okay, no, I'm saying, tell me what you want to make. And if we can do that and help, because we may be able to acquire material for a much less cost than you're able to acquire it for, but yet you're still going to make your same net profit, why not? So in any case, there's that. And the last comment I'll make, and then I notice Erin came back with another comment, which it's a little lengthy, so we'll have to read this one to the group. But one of the things that I have to emphasize is the other comment we hear. We've been doing this for 25 years. And basically people believe that they have their processes down. The one thing I can tell you that we have learned over the 10 to 12 years we've been doing multifamily, there isn't a project we do that we don't learn something new in doing it and then make sure it's incorporated in our next project. I can tell you that emphatically. Over those 60 projects, there's and it depends what it is. It could be a method for how a subcontractor is approaching a project, and I go, wow, that's fantastic. That's a great idea, and it may not necessarily save money, but it helps with scheduling, duration, whatever the case might be. Okay, could be a new product. All of a sudden a sub comes in and says, hey, I've got a substitution request, or I'd like to do this, and I think we can save some money. I can tell you, it's never just one item either that we learn from each new project we do, but we take that and we make sure that's moved forward. So we have an evolving process. Unfortunately, what I see is most don't have an evolving process. They're very comfortable with what they're doing because they've been successful, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're okay with the status quo, I'm not going to argue that. But that's, to me, an important part of what we do, and I think the value we bring. And then the last comment I'll make, it's interesting because we get a lot of challenges, in particular with new suppliers and traveling subs, because a general contractor will tell me, well, we're really nervous. We were used to using, subcontractor A, B, and C's on our last 6 projects. But they end up agreeing to some extent because we got to get to the budget or the project doesn't go forward. So they understand that. And here's what I find most interesting. A pretty good percentage of the subs and suppliers we introduce in projects ultimately end up bidding future projects that we're not involved in with that general contractor. So what ends up happening, what that means, they've actually used that sub on the project that we were involved in. They're working with another developer or client, and they go, oh, geez, we got a bid drywall. Geez, the drywaller that did the project with us with CDK, he kicked ass. So maybe we should have him bid our new project, ultimately does, and starts working for him. I've got, using the drywall example, I got a drywall sub that's now in about his 8th project outside of what we introduced him to. And the same developer, but I have nothing to do with those 8 projects, but they continue to use him because he performed. And they're finding that now he's extremely competitive and have added him into their portfolio of subs. Anyway, with that, let's see what Erin has to say here.
Yeah, so Erin's saying she was responding to an earlier, she had asked that question earlier, and then Dave, that's been kind of Dave's response if you're just joining us now. But she's saying, like you, I prefer to use my trusted trades for schedule and pricing. I don't bid it out later to other companies. We continue to work with those trades through design and construction. When it comes to construction and change orders, it makes the conversation easier as they had a seat at the table early and can't point fingers if they didn't bring up issues or RFIs.
Okay. I mean, that's your process. And I get it, and it makes sense. And if it works for you, that's fantastic. Ours is a slight variation to that, okay? And I say slight because the subs that we have give feedback may or may not ultimately end up being awarded the project. They know that going in. We don't, it's full disclosure with everything we do with somebody saying, hey, we're looking for feedback. Certainly it gives you a leg up on the project, but you're still going to be competitive. You're mentioning, change orders and RFIs. The only thing I can emphasize there, our projects don't have a significant amount, I'm not going to say of change orders, of cost overrun beyond what's budgeted. And that includes always a contingency somewhere, depending on the project and the size, of 3 to 5%. Pretty much can assure you they're going to come in on that unless there is a change in scope of some sort. But in any case, I get it. I wouldn't question what works for you, for sure.
All right, well, we're getting to the top of the hour here. So we should probably start wrapping up. If anyone who is still with us, first, I want to thank you for being with us for this hour. And if you have any last questions that you wanted us to address, then let us know. Also, if you have other topics or things that you think would be interesting or helpful to learn, or that you would like to have a discussion with us about, then please let us know. You are always welcome to send a message to either Dave or myself. We are both on LinkedIn, and we'll do this again. We've talked about doing the live stream. We did one last year, and we just haven't actually done. So we're getting our feet wet with this. We're kind of figuring out the process, but it's something that I think we both want to start doing more. Because there is so much to be gained from collaboration, and not just us up here talking about what CDK does and the things that are working for us, but also for any of you who are watching that you've learned things, or there's things that are working for you, whether it's in your market or something. So it would be really cool over time if this evolved to be kind of a collaborative experience. And we'd also love to take, look at any projects live. So if you have something you're like, I would really love to see, on a quick glance, like, what do you think about this design or this floor plan, or what would be your feedback? Things like that, we're more than happy to do. Just reach out, let us know, and we'll coordinate it. We could do it, privately, or, my preference would be that we do on something like this, like a live, so a lot of people can learn and kind of start to understand, because I think that tends to be one of the things that feels like a little bit of a holdup sometimes for someone. Like if you're the developer anyway, it's like, okay, I understand in concept some of these things, but I've pulled these experts all around me, right? Like I have my architect, my GC, and my sub, and they're the experts in these things. So how do I even start to question or to know how we can improve it? I trust them, but I know there's still room for improvement, but like, I don't know where to go from here. So I think having those constructive conversations, or seeing how we approach it, can also help you. Even if we're not involved in the process, you can take what we're doing, or look at the same kinds of things and be applying them to your projects. let's see, we do have Trevor, Trevor Haar's on here, and he's saying, I've worked with Dave for 8 years and I can guarantee he's the real deal. You should at least listen to him or hire him for a consultation. Well, we certainly appreciate that, Trevor. We do have a long, CDK has a long relationship with Trevor.
I'd like to add a couple of things too before we hang it up. Christy raised one point that, you know, we're really interested in doing, and we're going to continue to try to, I guess, nurture this and develop a little bit more. We'd really love to try to have some type of regular scheduled thought-provoking forum where we're just not on this end speaking, but we get a group together that we all have mutual interests, right? And share various challenges or issues that we're experiencing. And as a group, try to discuss how others may view it, resolve it, approach it, whatever the case might be. So ultimately, that's a path that we would like to be on. And the other thing I'd like to add very quickly here is that along with reaching out to us on LinkedIn, I'll give you my direct email address. It's a real simple one. It's dave@cdkinc.com. And if there's any questions, or as Christy indicated, anything, you know, you'd like to share or you'd like comment on, seriously, feel free to just reach out to me directly, either by email or certainly through LinkedIn. Other than that, I want to thank you all for joining us. And I hope you got some value out of today's discussion.
Quick for anyone who missed it. Dave's email, I think. There we go.
That's better than me stating it. Perfect.
Just in case anyone missed it. So sorry if it cut out there briefly. My connection is not stable, but we got it on there. So thank you again, everyone who joined. This was really fun for us. And hopefully you learned a thing or two. If you have questions or, you know, want to talk about anything we covered here today, then just reach out to us, email, LinkedIn, it doesn't matter. So thank you again.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.